Okay, guys, welcome back. This is the second match for the day for the competitive team league of Flesh and Blood TCG. This is our second round. This game is between Kanaris and let me look real quick his opponent, and his opponent is named Zefanya. So we had pretty tough luck on our first game facing Stavro with Chain. It's one of those matches where it's pretty close, maybe slightly favored for Stavro, but it all comes down to if he will manage to hit the disruptions before the opponent can before the chain player really manages to start putting up the pressure. And on the last game we saw that he he actually managed to do so. So on our second turn we have a Viserai facing a Boltyn. That's a really interesting pick. So it's our second match for today. So Viserai is one of those deck where pretty much was considered one of the Black Horses decks, one of those, sleeper kind of decks. And with the appearance of the latest set, he managed to get cards like, Revel in Runeblood, or that made him, be able to get toe to toe with some of the most competitive decks out there. One of the key cards for Viserai probably is Murder Tide. I mean, the whole thing that the moment the deck explodes most of the time is when you manage to draw enough copies of these cards in the right moments, and of course being followed by either a good Sonata turn or, just following off with the required resources you would like to have to finish the turn. Boltyn was pretty much one of the favored decks here in Europe on the last season, though, after the appearance of most ice-themed decks like Lexi and Oldhim, he hasn't shown much of performance. But regarding the current meta game, it's one of those decks that you shouldn't sleep on, because even though he might struggle against deck that can run ice cards, he's one of these really aggressive decks if you can manage to have the time to build up either a soul or just put a really big pressure to your opponent. It's one of those decks where if the metagame was a bit different we might have seen a bit more of him, but it looks like that we haven't seen any great performances with Boltyn later this year. But it's a different tournament, so it's interesting to see what kind of archetypes or decks most of the teams will attempt to find. Because I will repeat the rules of this tournament. It's 5 players of each team have to randomly pick a hero, and get randomly assigned a player playing a different hero on their opponent's team. So you do have to play 5 different heroes. That means that you cannot play like a lot of if one deck is really strong, like right now it's with the Stavro, you cannot have many players play this deck. So after the 3 first decks, which I guess for most teams it would be easy to guess which decks those would be, it's interesting what most of the teams will bring to the table. So it's we are playing Boltyn versus Viserai. It looks like Viserai will get the first turn. It's Viserai really likes to have the first turn of the game setting up these rune chants, so if he has the time to set up, but it looks like it's pretty much a passive turn from the Viserai player. He will just pitch 2 cards in order to cycle and make a rune chant with Grasp of the Arknight and put a single card in arsenal. It looks like the Boltyn player has sacrificed just 1 piece for a single arcane barrier, which is normal facing a deck like Viserai, especially if he's trying to hit his combo. And it looks like he will answer with an Enlightened Strike for the first turn, swinging with 5 or 7 go again. We will see in just a moment what's this attack's power is. Boltyn in short term just needs about 4 to 6 cards in his soul and 2 copies of either Lumina or the reaction that fetches for Lumina. That means that, okay, so probably he swinged for 5 and go again and attacked with the saber by pitching a yellow. Courage still hand for another 2. So if Boltyn manages to find at least 4 to 6 cards and get the cards he needs, he creates a pretty explosive turns. Where the thing is, with the current meta game, it's not easy, but against Viserai, who doesn't have much interaction in terms of this, it could be a pretty annoying opponent to play against. So first turn, Viserai just accepted all the damage that the Boltyn player had to deliver, wanting to keep his 4-card hands. The thing with Viserai is the more cards you have in hand most of the time, the more times you are able to do the stuff you want to proc the Viserai trigger, make more rune sounds and keep pushing. So it looks like we have a Sonata for 2, that means 4 cards will get to be revealed. One of the key cards for most of the Viserai builds nowadays for either Bleeds or Constructed. So a bit of an unlucky hit there, just finding 3 non-attacks and 1 attack. That means he will only get to amplify the Arknight Raid to his hand, the Viserai player. And he will keep the rest of the cards shuffled in his deck while the Sonata is banished. But the thing with Viserai is that even in this bad case scenario, he's played his non-attack, he has the time he wants to start pushing, and there it is, one of the also newcomers of the set, Swarming Gloomveil, an amazing card for pretty much every Runeblade. So right now, because 2 rune chants have been generated, Swarming Gloomveil is attacking for 4 with Go again. A quick reminder that the rune chants are also aura tokens, that means that they progress for Viserai, and we see a really quick block from the Boltyn player, using to block with his armor now that he has the chance to get the full value. And speak of the devil, Revel in the Runeblood, one of those cards that really pushed Viserai to probably one of the most competitive decks in Constructed. So he gets to create another 5 rune chants and attack, play another Mavern Skies to create 1 more rune chant, and with the last pitch he has, make a pretty huge turn with his Amplify the Arknight. And also giving it go again to have the one floating to attack with Rosetta. So right now, with a pretty medium 5-card hand with Sonata, we get to see him swinging for 6 go again plus 7 rune chants. That's one of the reasons why Viserai managed to be able to be one of those really aggressive decks. The Boltyn still has his whole hand. He just chooses, as it seems, to pitch a blue card in order to prevent 3 of the 7 arcane damage. He still has 3 cards in hand and an arsenal. He might be able to pull up a turn, or no, it looks like he will go to the defense route. playing the Soul Shield, one of these really nice cards when you want to have enough time, because it both blocks pretty well, like you blocked with two cards in hand, and it gets a card into his soul. And we see one of the pretty straightforward follow-ups of Viserai following the attacks with Rosetta Thorn. One also of the pretty big power players from Aria that gave birth to so many aggressive Runeblade builds. So right now they are doing all these strange math that pop up when playing against Runeblades. And a pretty huge turn, even though Boltyn managed to block. But that's the thing with Viserai most of the time, that he has all these, on and off turn. Boltyn managed to keep two cards in his hand, so we might see a setup attack come back, either a charge or, an arsenal setup and a small little attack. We'll see. But it's most of the time, yeah, it's pretty much a clock. If Boltyn manages to charge his soul enough times and manages to find all the combo pieces he requires, Viserai does not have many ways to interact with his whole Lumina combo. It's right now just the second turn of the game again, and we see so much pressure being pushed from the Viserai player. And Bolt of Courage is one of those cards where, especially if the arsenal is empty, because Boltyn has charged that the Viserai player most of the time doesn't want that to hit, to let the Boltyn player cycle the most of his deck. But the thing is, because Boltyn has charged while attacking with cards such as these, the attack actions in Viserai's hand give +1 to the Bolt of Courage. That means that he cannot cleanly block with just one card from hand if it's an attack action to Bolt of Courage. And it looks like we have some gear blocked from Viserai, stopping this this really annoying effect, but sacrificing this much needed armor during the turns in which he wants to stop the big combo from Boltyn. But the Viserai player most of the time hopes to never get to this point, to just finish the game up before the opponent manages to find time. And we see a pretty typical turn again. Blue Maverick Skies giving go again to a meet and greet, so meet and greet right now swings for 4. Go again, and potentially having to create an additional 2 rune chance if it hits. Let's see how the Boltyn player wants to react. It might not seem it's not as explosive as the games might go sometimes with Starver, but that's the thing with Viserai, all this efficiency, that just a 0 cost non-attack and a 1 cost card are enough to potentially deal damage that at some point will not be able to just not block. So it looks like he will just block with 1 card in hand with a red Valiant Thrust, stopping 3. That means that he will get to create an additional 2 rune chants, up to 3 rune chants. And that's where the thing with Viserai starts to pump up, and we see now, whoa, another Swarming Gloom Veil. That means that because of all these rune chants that have been created, all of its 3's effect are active. Probably the third part, the arcane damage part, is not as relevant as the other two, but swinging for 4 with 0 go again, you are always happy with that. It looks like the Boltyn player again just wants to play, it looks like he's pitching 3 cards in order to prevent all of the arcane damage, and blocks 3 to just take 1 physical. That means 1 damage gets to leak. And then the Viserai player gets to do his thing and attack with Rosetta again, doing this really clean 1-2 punch turn. The Boltyn there didn't want to take much damage, so he chose to fully block his turn, waiting for these critical cards. Well, as a reminder, most of the time as a Boltyn player, you want to be in a high total enough that when you find your whole combo pieces, you do have the life total high enough to be able to take a full damage turn from your opponent. But let's see if Viserai wants to give his opponent this much time. And also the thing is that most of the times in all of Saber Boltyn's matches, the life totals are a bit deceptive. What's way more important most of the time is how many cards are in Soul. And right now, the Boltyn player just has 2 cards in his Soul, but the Viserai player has also used some parts of his equipment, so he might not be far from executing his combo, but he really needs some time to breathe. That probably the Viserai player does not want him to do that. So again, Mordred, one of those cards that we discussed about, that it's one of the really strong players right now for this deck. So we see a pretty, you'd say, weak turn for right now, just swinging with their blue Spellblade Assault for 2 physical damage and just the 1 arcane, but creating a massive amount of 5 runes and later because of Mordred. So the Boltyn player at least sees that he's able to have a turn, taking just the 2 physical damage and the 1 arcane that was dealt to him, and then having at last a 4 card hand to play with. But probably he knows that if he doesn't manage to push the enemy enough, that the 5 runescent Viserai player with an arsenal won't let him have fun on his next turn either. So right now we see him attacking with Enlightened Strike for, I'm guessing, 5 go again, because he still has 2 cards in his hand. Enlightened Strike is one of those cards in Welcome to Wrath where, you know, it looks like it will be a staple for a long time. A lot of aggressive decks really love to have access to this card that gives so much versatility. It looks like, yeah, that is correct. He could do 7 with Gojen, but it looks like he went the route of just dealing 5 with regular Gojen and then attacking with a Bolt of Courage and charging up. It looks like he wants to keep his soul total high, but it is correct if he wanted to push as much damage as possible, that because Enlightened Strike's second effect gives +2 to itself, Boltyn is able to banish a card from his soul to give an attack action. Nice point, Nakizuma. So let's see again if the Viserai player wants to allow the Boltyn player to draw 1 card with Bolt of Courage. Boltyn's arsenal is clean right now, so it's one of those cards that allows him to cycle, so probably Viserai doesn't want him to do that. But the thing is, because he has used his armor on the last Red Bolt Courage he was attacked with, he has to either sacrifice a piece of equipment, which is not something that the Viserai players like to do, or lose a card from his hand, which is not either. Let's see if the Viserai prefers to have his full 4-card hand plus arsenal, or is okay with taking some damage and allowing the Boltyn player to cycle through his deck. The thing with the double Saber Boltyn is that pretty much there are no cards that you don't like being in arsenal. Even all your blue cards or your peach cards, everything can be played pretty much. So it's not like some other decks where some blue cards might not fit into Arsenal or might not be strong enough. That's not so much the case with Boltyn. That's why it seems like a pretty difficult decision. And the Boltyn player here also managed to disguise his Bolt of Courage by opening his attack with an Enlightened Strike. Because if the Viserai player would be on the would want to block with some card because he would have like a more passive turn like Read the Runes or something, he would have sacrificed cards for an Enlightened Strike, making it so that he either had to sacrifice more cards for the Bolt of Courage or let him take it. Either case, it's one of those cards, Bolt of Courage, that pretty much it's the glue of the deck. And it looks like we will see a block with a red non-attack, something that Viserais are not loving of doing, but you know, allowing the Boltyn player to draw a card is not something that he would like to do either. So Viserai right now has a 3-card hand and 1 card in arsenal. The life totals are 19 and 28. Viserai has a pretty decent lead, but that's the thing with Boltyn. He has just 3 cards in his soul. He might be just a bit off of being able to pop off his combo because he also doesn't have a card in arsenal. But we could probably see a 2-turn or something from Boltyn. So life totals here again might be a little deceptive. So we see a Become the Arcanite discarding an attack action. That means that Become the Arcanite allows you to fetch any Runebleed non-attack action he wants. Which it's the arguably Become the Arcanite is one of those cards that makes Viserai one of the hardest decks to play, because in games like this, having a 60 card deck and being able to fetch pretty much any card into your hand gives you just so many options. Let's see what route though the Viserai player will go. If he's looking for an activation ability like a Guardian or Marble Skies, or just a passive turn for just fetching Read the Runes or Mordred Tide. It's funny how quickly just a few good cards pushed Viserai from being one of the, you know, not so much discussed decks or a bit of the pet deck for everybody to one of the better tier decks. So we see a Sonata Arcanix coming from the Viserai player. While having Skeleton up, he might want to push Boltyn into a point where he doesn't have the time or the resources to be able to execute his whole combo, and that's exactly what looks like is going to happen. The Viserai player right now wants to push for as much damage as possible, and the Sonata Runescent Skeleton combo is one of his favorites. So right now, Sonata is paid pretty much for 4 because of the Runescent, because it gets discounted by 5. That means that he will get to reveal 5 cards looking for at least 3 and 2. It looks like he doesn't have the time or wants to give the time to Boltyn to make a huge Sonata, so this Sonata might whiff, but it looks like just 2 cards might do the trick. So we already have 3 non-attacks and 2 attacks, and that's exactly what the Viserai player wanted to do. To find just 2 attacks, preferably 1 blue card maybe, it depends on what kind of cards he has in his hand, and be able to push. And Gloomveil is one of those cards where you always love finding on the Sonata, because if you have created just 1 Runescent but while playing the Gloomveil, it will get go again. So it's almost a free card that deals about 4 damage, and that's exactly the value you are looking for with Sonata. The Boltyn is down to 17. That means that if Viserai right now has a pretty explosive turn, he might be able to push the Boltyn onto a point where he won't be able to take the full damage turn from Viserai to execute his combo, and that's pretty much Boltyn right now should be feeling the sweat that he's getting pushed back a lot, and that's a reason because when Viserai and traditionally other Runeblade decks like Chain and Briar were so oppressive during their representative metagames because they were just sometimes so fast. So it looks like the Boltyn will be pitching a V4 Vanguard Yellow to just block 2 of the arcane damage. That means he will either take 4, have to pitch more, and pitching a red Razor Reflex in blocking with a red take flight. That means he took 3 from the arcane damage probably, and 1 damage of the Swarming Gloomveil managed to come through. It's one of those things where Boltyn, especially very aggressive builds, if he doesn't have the time to be able to push the opponent down or force him to block with some cards, having a lot of cards that do not block really well, like Razor Reflexes, might doom him on these kind of scenarios. That's true. The Skeletor reduction didn't matter because of Swarming Gloomveil, but if he didn't have another card to give it go again, it's the only card that had go again. Now we see a Consuming Voltician, a card that a card that used to have very love here in Greece on the Boltyn heavy meta on Monarch. But it looks like it works here just as well. Once again, it forced the Boltyn player to block with the whole of his hand. And that's the reason why the Viserai player should be feeling better right now, because 3 cards in soul and no arsenal means that it's probably pretty hard to execute the combo, but not impossible. And the Viserai player, even though he has used 2 of his Gloomveils, he still has his Creepers to keep pushing with this 1-2 hit non-attack attack Rosetta action. And the Boltyn player is not really well equipped to take all these punishment. The Boltyn player really needs the Viserai to give him a turn off, to have a turn that without pushing. And we see a Tome of the Arknight being played, one of those cards where there has been a lot of discussion between if Tome of the Arknight is a good card or no, but there are situations like this with zero setup that it manages to give you a non-attack and an attack action. Tome of the Arknight reads that reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. If you reveal an attack action card and a non-attack action card this way, put them into your hand. Otherwise, it just does nothing. But the biggest drawback of this card is that it has 2 armor, and that's why a lot of Viserai players have not chosen to play her. But if you want to have the more aggressive routes, because there are some tumblings like this where if you have flooded with probably blue cards, it's a good way to might find some damage. Right now, the only efficient way to set up Tome of the Arknight is probably opting. That is correct. But on the most aggressive Viserai builds, probably most people don't like to waste slots in having to use cards that opt. That's why probably Tome of the Arknight is not much played. But again, there are some cases because Viserais a lot of time just want to have a non-attack action being played. They don't really care about the effect, just to activate the rest of their cards. And that's why sometimes, cards like Tome of the Arknight find their love. So, Rattlebones, one of these pretty good finishers. A way pretty much to play Gloomveil as many times as you want, or a lot of times find the specific card you require to have a pretty pushy turn. So right now we saw that Rattlebones was played targeting a red Amplify the Arknight. It looks like we are heading again to have a pretty big attack. So, and the yellow Mavern Skies is being played. That means that another Runescent token has been created. That means the Amplify the Arknight gets to be played for free and has go again, so that's an amazing swing for 6 go again. 3 Runescents, and of course the really oppressive effect of Maverick Skies. Really, Maverick Skies was one of those cards where it's pretty hard not seeing this card being on every Rune Viserai deck, at least on a few copies. So we see right now 6 block for the physical and 4 pitching to block all the arcane, having a remaining 1 floating to pretty much block all the damage that the Viserai player tries to get through. But that means right now that the Boltyn player again has 0 cards in hand, so the next attack of the Viserai probably will be completely undefended. And that's the magic of Viserai playing with so many cards in hand that, you know, after your first turn attack, every card you play just gets to create an additional Runescent and an additional Runescent, and all this damage at some point adds up to a point where your opponent doesn't have the resources to be able to stop this barrage of attacks. And there have been some decks that could potentially block these kind of attacks, but Boltyn doesn't seem to be one of those decks that traditionally managed to defend such a big damage output. So we see the blue oath that was revealed due to the Tomb of the Arknight earlier, so just a clean +1 and another Runescent token is the perfect thing to attack with Rosetta, because again, Oath of the Arknight reads your next Runeblade attack this turn gains +1. That means that even a weapon attack is considered an attack that gets the +1. So effectively, with a blue card and the Oath of the Arknight, he managed to swing with their 3 Runescents for an amazing 8 damage with just his weapon. And it's the thing where we've seen a lot of games, especially people who played before Tales of Aria, that were in a situation like this where the Boltyn player was in a huge life loss and the opponent player pretty much had almost thought to win the game and managed to pull off the combo, his amazing double Lumina combo, and to swing the game to his favor. But this game looks like that the Boltyn player didn't have the time to set up all the pieces he needed, and he might need, if he gets a turn from the Viserai player, he might be able to do something about it. And it looks this might be one of those turns, because the Viserai reacts with just an Arknight Shard and the Command and Conquer. So that means that the Spellbound Creepers are still in effect. That might be a little misleading from the Viserai player's side. Yeah, exactly that. He wanted to pay an additional one with Creepers and gain back his Gradient in order to push in additional damage with his Rosetta. And that's also a lot of times deceptive with the renewable players, that if they manage to have the Spellbound Creepers always towards here, he managed to have the extra Gradient he needs to finish up the game. Yeah, there we saw probably a misleading block from the Boltyn player, but it looks like the Command and Conquer will be fully blocked, leaving the Boltyn player with 2 cards in hand. But that means, because of the instant interaction of Spellbound Creepers and the Runeblood Incantation, that the Viserai player right now still has his very much valued action point to do the Runescent Rosetta attack. Yeah, the Runescent, because of the Shard of the Arknight being pitched. That means that he swings for a total of 5 damage. He gets a 3 arcane and no, it looks like he blocked 2 of the arcane damage, taking 2 physical down to just a single point of life. That means that on Viserai's next turn, if he just manages to swing with activated Rosetta once, the game should be over unless Boltyn is playing something like Sigil of Solace, which is, we would say, it's not the regular. It looks like we have a cleanup on the attack. And it looks like, yeah, it was 1 arcane damage from the Rune Sand, 2 arcane damage from Rosetta, and 2 physical. That means a total of 5. So if he blocked 2, yeah, he should be from 5 to 2 life totals. The Boltyn probably managed to at least keep the 1 card in hand he so desperately needed to put in Arsenal, and we had a little glimpse there that actually it was a Lumina Ascension, but that means that if Viserai allows him to live for another turn with at least 3 cards in hand, or 2 cards in hand and Arsenal, he might be able to execute his combo, but I don't think the Viserai player will allow something like that. Yes, and probably Rattlebones is the nail to the coffin, because it's a non-attack action with Guegen that can fetch so many cards with naturally Guegen from the graveyard, allowing the Viserai player to close up this game with Rosetta, unless the Boltyn player has something really tricky up his sleeve. And that's where probably the Swarming Gloomveil shines, because it ticks so many things in the Viserai deck. It's a cheap way to attack early, it's a great finisher with Rattlebones, it's an efficient finisher with as a target of Rattlebones. You just, most of the time, you really like having this card in your hand if you manage to have a more than 2 card hand. And let's see how the Boltyn will interact. Right now the Swarming Gloomveil swings for a total of 4, because 2 rune sands have been created, 1 from playing an attack and attack from Viserai, and 1 from the Runeblood Incantation. And it looks like that the Boltyn player will pitch to prevent the arcane damage and use a Soul Shield to prevent all of the physical damage from Gloomveil. That leaves him with just 1 card in hand, and that's the writing on the wall for the Viserai player, who also uses a Revel in Runeblood to create another 5 runes and tokens and swing with this deadly Rosetta. And pretty much that's the reason why. And also Runeflash, no, sorry, it's way more damage than I thought, probably than needed, but still. And that's probably the reason, because all these cards made Viserai one of these so strong decks. I mean, having all this turn was performed by pitching a single blue card and having the right timings on all the rune sands. I mean, his whole turn dealt an amount of something like, what, 4 from the Gloomveil plus 4 from the Rune Flash, let's say another 4 from the Rosetta, 12, up to 12 plus about 6 for instance. He managed to do about a 20 life total turn with just a single blue card in hand. And that's one of the reasons why Viserai right now probably has one of the hottest spots on the constructed metagame. But that's it. That's the second game for FAB Chaos. We managed today to be 1-1 versus the opposing team. So that's all for today. We had some pretty blast from the past games today, with a pretty typical Stavro and Chain in the first round, and right now a Boltyn Viserai Boltyn Viserai face off. That means that the score right now being 1-1, we still have 3 games to find if we manage to win our first game of the season. So, thanks a lot for stopping by. Hit a follow if you would like to see some more content. We will try to stream probably as many games as possible from the competitive tournament league. I'm your host, Saxo, and again, thank you very much for staying here with us. So, see you around.